computer. Okay. Okay. So we finally arrived at the famous I think therefore I am. So I just want to talk about um, um, what it before I start talking about what it does mean, I want to talk about what it doesn't. Um, so I mean the these words don't actually occur in the meditations, right? But they do occur in the discourse and perhaps also in the principles. I mean, uh, um, and they're like, if you've heard anything, what was Descartes said, you would hear that he said, I think, therefore I am. Um, and there's even jokes about this, like um, Descartes walks into a bar and the bartender says, would you like a beer? And he says, I think not. And he disappears. But but that joke, see, that joke actually embodies a wrong way of understanding the sense. So, like, I mean, I guess one thing you might think it means is that so might think it means I think I am, therefore I am, right? That like whatever I think is true or something like that. I mean, I hope we, ruled out that Descartes thinks anything like that. Um, But another thing you might think it means is like I cause myself to exist by thinking. That's kind of what that joke is assuming, right? I think, therefore I am means I only exist because I think. I make myself exist by thinking. So if I think not, proof. Um, uh, and that's actually why I assigned um, principles. Oh my, something leaked on my book. Oh. That's why I assigned principles part one, section 20, um, which really has to do with the third meditation, but it's just just even the title. We did not make ourselves, but were made by God, and consequently he exists. Right? Descartes doesn't think he causes himself to exist. I mean, right now, he hasn't shown anything about what causes him to exist. But in the end, he's not going to say that he's going to. The third meditation proof of the existence of God works specifically by showing that I couldn't have caused myself to exist. So that's not what this means. And this, I mean, it's not what it should mean. Like, therefore doesn't really mean that. I don't know if therefore ever means that, but it's certain, I mean, if you say like there's smoke, therefore there's fire, right? You don't mean the smoke causes the fire to exist. On the contrary, in this case, you probably think the fire caused the smoke to exist. That's not really, I mean, there really isn't such a thing as fire, right? Fire is just the place where the gases are heated up enough that they're glowing. But anyway, never mind that. And as usual, that means this thing doesn't move. No. I don't understand this room. All right. Anyway, um, right. So that's what it doesn't mean. Um, so now I'm going to start talking about what it does mean. And I mean, first I'm going to say, so um, this is often known as the cogito or cogito or There's many different ways of pronouncing Latin. Anyway, probably Descartes himself would have said something more like cogito. Uh, but uh, the cogito argument, right? Because this is how you say I think in Latin. So it's the I think argument. So you'll hear people calling it the cogito argument, and including me. Um, so I mean, first of all, this argument, it's not absolutely original with Descartes. Um, I mean, um, practically nothing in this book, or really in in any philosophical book, is completely original. Um, so, but I mean, so I guess maybe this is something that people would think is like something that only Descartes came up with, but that's not strictly speaking true. I mean, and in particular, two people who Descartes was influenced by. One is Avicenna, um, has an argument kind of like this called the floating man argument. I'll say more about that because it's actually what Avicenna really argues is more relevant to what happens in the later part of the second meditation. Um, and there's also in Saint Augustine, who also was influential on Descartes. Um, there's an argument which which is even more similar in the sense that it has a similar purpose. Like the in the dialogue, one of the characters is trying to convince the other one that at least they know something, and use as the example, well, you exist, right? So, um, however, I mean, I think, and I only see this because I've seen people saying something like this. I think like it would be absurd to conclude from that that Descartes is unoriginal. I mean, the way he put all these pieces together is surprising and radical, and you can tell by the way everyone around him reacts. Um, so, and neither Avicenna nor, and I mean, I don't think, I don't think Descartes I think the claim that no one before has ever made an argument like this is one that we kind of are projecting back into Descartes, right? Descartes doesn't make that claim. Um, but but so I mean, I think on the contrary, Descartes thinks it's kind of neat that he can recycle this argument from Augustine, right? But uh, Um, but nevertheless, neither Augustine nor Avicenna is using it in the context of the project of the meditations, right? It comes in as they're doing something else, basically. So, um, okay, so that's just about the historical antecedents. Um, and yeah, and I guess like even less should you conclude that so that like Descartes is a plagiarist or something like that. I mean, that concept doesn't really apply. It's, I mean, first of all, like I had a student once come to me afraid that they had said some things um, from Plato's dialogue without properly citing it, and they were afraid I was going to think they were plagiarizing. And I said, no, that's called an illusion. Right? When you quote Plato without citing it, that's not plagiarism, that's an illusion. You can't plagiarize Plato. That is, you can't try to convince someone that you had Plato's ideas. That's absurd, right? So, and more generally, like this is the way people write. Like we saw the way the Aristotelians write. You're supposed to recognize that it's from Aristotle, but they're not going to keep telling you, and Aristotle said this, and Aristotle said that. Um, right. So anyway, that's I think what's going on here. Um, So from now on, I'm just going to talk about how it actually turns up here and how it's supposed to work. So it starts, so as I said, the second meditation doesn't actually contain these words, I think, therefore I am. That, but the version of the cogito argument in the second meditation, which I guess is kind of the official version, right? I mean, it's the most explicitly set out version. So it begins on page 80 when the meditator says no, right? So the question before that is, um, but I've convinced myself, and this is, like I said, the doubting voice and the answering voice from the first meditation kind of continue into the beginning of the second meditation. Only now the answering voice is going to win. So that, right, the doubting voice says, but I've convinced myself that there is absolutely nothing in the world, no sky, no earth, no minds, no bodies. Does it not follow that I too do not exist? And the response is, no. If I convinced myself of something, or I guess I should read it this way. No, if I convinced myself of something, then I certainly existed. Um, so how's this supposed to work? Like, and maybe I should read the rest of it too, because then I'm going to talk about the whole thing. Because so that's part one, and but then the doubting voice comes back one more time. But there is a deceiver of supreme power and cunning who is deliberately and constantly deceiving me. In that case, I too, now see, this is a mistranslation actually. Sorry, but I have to talk about this. It says, um, so in Latin, there's a word that means to or also in this sentence, and they're taking it to go with the I too. But that doesn't make any sense. I, in addition to who? I too, what, what, how does that fit in here? So it really goes with exist, right? That's what it means is, um, in that case, I undoubtedly also exist if he is deceiving me. That is, he couldn't deceive me if I didn't exist. Um, so, I mean, it's really the same argument twice, and there's a question of why. It's not exactly the same, but it's really like virtually the same argument twice. That is, because the first one said, um, um, if I convinced myself of something, then I certainly existed. And the second one says, in that case, I undoubtedly also exist if he is deceiving me. Right? So in both cases, it's, well, this couldn't be happening. And these things that are happening are both examples of thinking. That's why it's like the unfolding of this argument. This couldn't be happening if I didn't exist. That is, number one, I couldn't be convincing myself of something if I didn't exist. And number two, I couldn't be deceived if I didn't exist. Um, so um, in a little bit of context, I mean, maybe I should just stop there. Let's see, what was I gonna say? No, maybe I should just stop there before I discuss the context. Um, like, um, do people understand how this argument is supposed to work? Are there questions about it? Yes.
But going back, I was just looking at the context. Is the translator meaning I too undoubtedly exist in addition to the deceiver, the supreme power?
Maybe, but yeah, maybe that's what they think it means, but that's not what it means. Right? Because the whole argument is that, you know, um, I must also exist if I'm being deceived. You can't only be deceived but not exist. Um, I think um, so what it says in the original is um, oh no, it's page 25. Um, right. Without doubt, therefore, I I don't even know if the Latin could mean what they're trying to do.
I have a question. Why do you think they're trying to make it mean that and that it's not just like a semantic issue and like it's just a bad translation? For example, like it can be interpreted the way that they do it and the way that he actually do it, right?
I see, I'm not even sure actually, now that I see what the I also exists. I don't think that the Essian could come here if it meant also I. I mean, I don't know, maybe my intuition, I don't have the intuitions of the native Latin speaker. But I don't think it even could mean that. It has to go with this. And why they're trying to make it mean that, I have no idea. I have a lot of questions about this translation. Maybe I should stop using it.
What's your feeling that they're trying to make it apply to the other word? That they're trying to say that like I exist when the deceiver exists? But I feel like it's also just read
Oh,
as you know, but I additionally am not.
in that case,
But the existence is what it implies.
I don't think the English would mean, you can't put, first that would have to be also, not to, and it would have to come after undoubtedly, I think.
Like two sentences earlier, it says, does it now follow that I too do not exist? Like it seems that they just have a preference to that.
Yeah. No, I know what you're saying. But no, but see there it's right. Does it not follow that I too do not exist? Because he just said all these other things do not exist. Doesn't it follow that I too do not exist? Um, yeah, and there the word order is says so it's right. Yeah, okay. I'm sorry. Maybe I spent way too much time on this. I mean, it's certainly an example of uh, if you want to work seriously on some piece of philosophy, translation is not really satisfactory. And, I mean, it's too, yeah. And on the other hand, like, you don't have to be a great Latinist to, to see what's going on here. You just have to be able to see what the words are and what words mean. Anyway, um, I mean, in this case, it's avoidable. Like they could have translated it better and they didn't. But in some cases, it's unavoidable. Like there's just ambiguities in one language that can't be left ambiguous in the other language or things like that. So you have to resolve something that the original doesn't resolve. And then, you know, whatever you do, you're giving a misimpression of what it actually says. There's all kinds of stuff like that. But in any case, sorry. So let me go back to how this argument works. So, right, um, like, um, so the idea is, well, nothing that can do anything if it doesn't exist. Um, so, so if so therefore, the idea of a deceiver deceiving someone who doesn't exist into thinking they exist makes no sense. Right? Like, who are they deceiving? There's no one there. They don't, the person they're supposedly deceiving doesn't exist. So it can't be done. Right? And um, I mean, you might say, well, how does he know he's not a figment of someone else's imagination? Or like a computer program in the Matrix, or a character in someone else's dream, or something like that. But I mean, that's why, and this is going to be like, this is the key to why the second meditation goes on the way it does. Like, so far, I haven't proved anything about what kind of thing this is. All I know about it is that it convinced itself of something. Right? So, like, if uh, if a computer program in the matrix is capable of convincing itself of something and then wondering whether it exists, then yes, it can carry out this argument. And the conclusion will be true. It does exist. Right? If a character in someone's dream is the kind of thing that can convince itself of something and follow out this argument, then it does exist. Um, it might be very wrong about what kind of thing it is. And that's exactly what Descartes or the meditator is going to go on to worry about. What kind of thing am I? Right? But uh, but the idea is that this argument by itself um, doesn't depend on knowing anything about it. And it doesn't show anything about that. At least initially, it seems not to show anything about that. Are there other questions about this? Because I'm going to go on to discuss some things, well, at least, yeah, I guess one or two things that really are worrying about this argument. But are there questions about it before I go on? Like sometimes there's like all these objections, but what if, no? Too late at night this year, maybe. All right, anyway. Um, so uh um okay, so here's the context, and there's really, so the step before this is um like, okay, so the first attempt to come back from radical doubt is, so the first attempt of the answering voice is the beginning of the paragraph. Yet apart from everything I have just listed, right? Body, shape, extension, motion, place, whatever. How do I know that there is not something else which does not allow even the slightest occasion for doubt? Is there not a God, or whatever I may call him, who puts into me the thoughts I am now having? And the doubting voice says, but why do I think this, since I myself may perhaps be the author of these thoughts? Um, so in the end, in the third meditation, there's going to be a proof that God is indeed the cause of some of those thoughts. But at this point, the doubting voice says, I might have caused all of them. And um, um, and so like the doubt that's hanging in the air here is, since like I caused all of my own thoughts, perhaps they might all be wrong. I might be deceiving myself about everything. Um, I mean, after all, right? But I have convinced myself there is absolutely nothing in the world, no sky, no earth, no minds, no bodies. Haven't I actually shown that all of these thoughts might be wrong? Um, so in other words, um, it's the opposite. The proof is not I cause myself to exist by thinking. The proof is um, I think, therefore I am, even though I might be the cause of all my own thoughts. Like, even that kind of bad situation, when not God, but me is the cause of all my thoughts, I can't go wrong about this. Um, okay, but that does kind of raise a problem. And the problem is, um, um, that there's like a gap between the time I convinced myself that there's absolutely nothing in the world and the time I realized that if I convinced myself of something, I certainly existed. Right. And and that's why it's in the past tense. So like in the simple famous form of it, it's all in the present tense, but in the actual form of the second meditation, it's in the past tense. If I convinced myself of something, then I certainly existed. So, I mean, there's kind of two questions here, right? Like, one is, well, I mean, it depends how you look at it. you could say, one is, well, how do I know I still exist? I existed then, but how do I know I still exist? And I mean, it's weird because then I guess you can perform the same move over again, but you still, right? So you say, well, I couldn't have doubted that if I didn't exist, but it's still always in the past. Or you could say, how do I know I really convinced myself of that? um, and um, the time that's being remembered here is the time when I was in that dark prison, right? Like when I wasn't yet able to prove to myself that I existed. It's that me that I'm proving existed. Um, so um, so this raises a a series of problems that later philosophers have thought might be a flaw in this argument. I mean, it's one way, like, so one way of putting it is more like the first thing I said is, how do I know that I'm a substance? That is, how do I know that I'm something that persists, that was the subject of the convincing myself, and now is the subject of the realizing that therefore I certainly existed. How do I know it's the same thing throughout? Right? And somebody like Nietzsche, I think, is one of the people who says, like, I should have said thinking exists. um, like, how do I know that I prove that something that thinks exists? That's this substance. Um, um, so, like, if you know, if you um, if you want to look for a problem in the argument, that's one place to look to figure out how that works. It's not, Descartes is aware of this, but it's not clear exactly what he means about it. I mean, he's he's in objections and replies, he says something about that I need to evoke the existence of God and the fact that God is not a deceiver to rely on my previous certainties. Um, um, but that's not available here. So there must be some other way of being convinced. Um, that the thing that wanted to prove that it existed, the thing that faced this task, waking up in the prison, is the very thing that succeeded. Um, okay, so that's one. I think, I mean, I guess I should make it clear what I'm doing here, right? Like I first presented the argument, make sure you understand what it means and why, like, the simple type of objections you might think of don't go against that. Now I'm saying, but there is something weird about it, or there's several weird things about it. I mean, look, like it, this argument, you seem to be getting something for nothing. It feels like something may have gone wrong somehow. Not as much as the fifth meditation proof of the existence of God, when we, ontological proof, when we get to that, I think like almost everyone looks at that and says, there's some trick here, that couldn't work. And this, it seems, well, on the one hand, yeah, it seems like, yeah, how could you be wrong about that? But on the other hand, yeah, it does feel like if you ask is there a premise and a conclusion here? And what's the rule of inference? Like, it doesn't really seem to work that way. So it's a weird argument. So I'm like, now I'm going through some of the things that are weird about it. And one of them is this, that what it seems like when you really focus on it, it's like there's a gap, there's like a temporal gap that you can never close. Um, so that's number one. A second question, this isn't really so much of an objection, but something weird about the argument is, why are there these two parts? Like, didn't the first part know if I convinced myself of something that I certainly existed, shouldn't that be the end of the story? I certainly existed. But then instead we get this further doubt. But there is a deceiver of supreme power and cunning who is deliberately and constantly deceiving me. And then the answer in that case, I undoubtedly also exist if he is deceiving me. Um, um, Now, I mean, um, it actually seems, based on what she said about the deceiver at the end of the first meditation, that perhaps we shouldn't expect this argument to add anything, right? Because the point there was that the deceiver is not an independent reason for doubt. The deceiver is a way of checking to make sure that I really haven't let the bias of my old opinions sneak in. And so maybe here we should say, oh yeah, we're just checking. And that's what I said last time. But this is the point where that fiction explicitly gets used. Right? To say, wait, but will this conclusion still stand up if even if an all-powerful deceiver is doing everything they can to deceive me? And the answer is yes, because if I don't exist, they can't deceive me. Right. So when it goes on to say, let him deceive me as much as he can, he will never bring it about that I am nothing, so long as I think that I am something. Um, Again, it's not because me thinking that I'm something makes it true or something like that, but it's because he can't bring anything about with respect to me if I don't exist. He can't convince me of true or false things if I don't exist. Um, but it also seems like there may be something else going on here. Um, I mean, because there is no new theoretical point at the end of the first meditation, right? Like there is no new consideration that makes it doubtful whether my old opinions are true. But there is this thing about the will. Um, um, right. So the last thing the meditator says before she starts talking about being sleepy and whatever is, I shall stubbornly and firmly persist in this meditation. And even if it is, I should say, at certe. I guess maybe it means and. I shall at least do what is in my power. That is, resolutely guard against assenting to any falsehoods, so that the deceiver, however powerful and cunning he may be, will be unable to impose on me in the slightest degree. No, I don't think it means and. Well, whatever. All right. Um, um, so, um, so maybe these two parts are actually, they're connected to two different things that are, like, from a theoretical point of view, the same stage, but from a practical point of view, that is determination of the will, they're not the same stage. Namely, on the one hand, the lack of certainty, right? I persuaded myself that there nothing exists, meaning, I mean, persuaded myself, meaning, um, persuaded myself that as far as I know, nothing exists except the world and whatever, whatever. I mean, no bodies, no, etc. Whereas the second one is the will to certainty, right? So there's the lack of certainty, the doubt, or maybe both of these are these are two parts of doubt. Doubt means not being certain, but wanting to be certain. Not knowing, but wanting to know. Um, and the the demon, supposing the demon, so to speak, proves to me, but it doesn't prove to me as a theoretical matter, right? But it gets me to reach this resolution. It's not a proof that I have free will and can reach a resolution. Because that, right, that would be theoretical, but it's like, um, um, in the face of the fiction of the demon, I make the resolution. I determine to stubbornly stick with this meditation so that no matter what, at least even if I can't discover anything true, at least I won't be deceived into believing something false. Um, um, and so, I mean, um, that is, in a way, I think you could say this argument does have a presupposition, but it's not a theoretical presupposition. Like, you have to be in a certain attitude of the will to make this argument. Um, so you're, um, it presupposes that you can do that, that you can resolve not to believe anything, um, until you can find a basis for certainty. Um, and the second move by bringing back the deceptor in there is calling attention to that. Um, and this might somehow, I mean, I don't know if this is a thought that Descartes has, or it could be a thought that Kant has at least, that somehow that's the resolution, or that somehow, like, working towards the resolution of what's going on with this temporal gap might have something to do with that. That, um, um, that, like I said before, what the question really is here, because we're talking about the self that I proved existed was the self, before it could prove itself to exist. So it was the self faced with this task symbolized by the deceiving demon. Um, and, and so the real question here is like, something about the continuity of the will. Not so much a metaphysical question about a substance, but like, um, uh, um, I guess you might put it something like this, like, can a being that has a will doubt that it has a continuation in time? Um, does like the will is, I mean, so the certainty goes back this way, but the will went this way. Right when I was here, what I wanted was not to have certainty at this time because I knew I didn't have certainty at this time. What I wanted was to have certainty at this time. Okay, I don't know exactly how to develop that, and I'm not gonna try to. But Levinas, who I mentioned before, who has thought a lot about, especially the first three meditations. I think it's like, so actually in Totality Infinity, which is Levinas's main early book, there's a chapter called Atheism or the Will, which kind of corresponds to the beginning of the second meditation. That is, it's like, um, without yet realizing what it is that guarantees my continuity or something like that. The, 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 um, that's the state of knowing that I have a will. I think you may be thinking about something like this, but I won't say more about it. Are there more questions about this before? Are there any questions about this before I go on? It's hard to know whether with this text, I mean, because obviously, like, I could go through this argument and just say, this is how it's supposed to work. And then go on, and it's pretty simple. But um, but I'm trying to call attention to the fact that that was so influential on later philosophy that people realized that, oh, there's something that's not so simple about it. Yeah.
Considering like says, what is like the move after a thing? Like it seems that Descartes finds a lot of certainty in that. We can claim true like objectivity for lack of a better term in that. What how do you keep moving from this?
Uh, so I'm not sure.
That's your problem, but
What 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 did you first say about the demon? I think I didn't hear the first part.
yeah, the
Considering
question
that,
is like if the demon exists and everything can just be a moment of deception. I understand the argument that I think is still kind of safe from the demon's powers and all of the deception that comes with it. My question is that post that, after Fujita or after that kind of defining the resistance, how can you continue to move through this process of finding out more certainty, more truth, more objectivity?
right. So there's two main steps, and one is what I'm about to talk about that, um, which raises a lot more problems though, which is that, what must I know about myself if I just prove that I exist? Right. So that's what comes immediately in the second meditation. Then the latter part of the second meditation was about the nature of body, and it's still kind of hypothetical because the meditator hasn't proved that there are any bodies. But so the next real move comes in the third meditation, the proof of the existence of God. And I think what's true is, and what I'm going to try to explain is that Descartes thinks that somehow those two other steps are just reinterpretations of what happened here. Right? Because yeah, they can't go beyond it. Once you have the existence of God, then you know that there is no all-powerful deceiver. I mean, we have to discuss that too, right? But because, right, you know that the all-powerful thing is not a deceiver. So then you can go on, right? But until that point, it's true, you can't, and this is actually what's sometimes known as the Cartesian circle. We'll talk about it when we get to the third meditation. Right? Like, how can you get that one extra step without presupposing it? Is that enough an answer for
Yeah,
that?
for now.
Okay. All right. Right. So the immediate problem here is um um okay, I exist, but what am I? Right. So that's why the beginning of um the next paragraph on page 81, but I do not yet have a sufficient understanding of what this I is that now necessarily exists. So I must be on my guard against carelessly taking something else to be this I, and so making a mistake in the very item of knowledge that I maintain as the most certain and evident of all. So, I mean, right away, we notice something else really weird about this argument. In a way, I mean, I already mentioned it, but I didn't explain how weird it is. I proved that something exists, but I have no idea what it is. How is that possible? Right? Like, so, I mean, I used to say something like, suppose I prove to you that there's a boozle on the other side of this wall. And you say, well, what is a boozle? And I say, I don't know. So that would be weird, right? What do you mean you proved that you exist so you don't know what it is? Well, that's, people pointed out that, well, um, I know something about it. It's on the other side of this wall. But okay, forget about that. Just say I'm certain that a boozle exists, but I don't know what it is. So that seems like nonsense. Right? Um, so the strategy is going to be, um, and this is a general rationalist strategy, which maybe I already mentioned actually. No, I don't think so. It's a general rationalist strategy. Suppose I can think of A that is an A existent. Of course, if I'm thinking of A, I'm thinking of it as I'm thinking of A existing. So suppose I can think of A existing without thinking of B existing. Well, in that case, A and B are not the same. Right? And this is, like if you wonder how do rationalists think that from reason alone we can find something out about the world. This is the main technique, basically. You tell which things you have to think together and which things you can think apart. And that's the way of telling which things are the same and which things are different. It's also supposed to be a way of telling which things cause which is kind of a problem. I mean, this will be especially acute when we get to Spinoza, like trying to understand when you're supposed to say that one is the other and when you're supposed to say that one is the effect of the other. But in any case, if you can think of A without B, then they're neither identical nor does one depend on the other causally. You can think of them separately. Yeah, so like, what's the justification for that? Well, I mean, so first of all, like at this point in the second meditation, the meditator doesn't really regard it as completely as justified yet. Because the argument she's going to make is of the form like, um, well, um, if I can think of A without B, suppose I've proved that A exists, but I don't know if B exists. Well, then I couldn't have proved that B exists. What I proved exists was A. The further step to, and therefore A could exist without B, she doesn't actually take yet. Um, you can see this in um, um, on page 82. And yet may it not perhaps be the case that these very things which I am supposing to be nothing because they are unknown to me are in reality identical with the I of which I'm aware, right? So that's saying, true, what I proved to exist was A. I'm not filling in what A and B are yet. I didn't prove that B exists, but couldn't it be that even though I don't know it, A and B are really the same? Um, and the answer here in the second meditation is, I do not know, and for the moment I shall not argue the point, since I can make judgments only about things that are which are known to me. So, right, that is what she says here is, okay, maybe A is the same as B, but that's not what I proved. So for now, all I know, what I'm certain of is that A exists. Possibly it's the same thing as B. Later in the sixth meditation, but that's going to rely on God not being a deceiver or something like that. Later in the sixth meditation, or it's not really so much divine power that it relies on. In the sixth meditation, she's going to say, no, that actually shows that A and B are distinct things, that A could exist without B. Um, but generally speaking, like so I asked what justifies this, and I said, well, at this point, the meditator's not taking it as justified. But like in general, why do rationalists think this is justified? It's like um, um, if you can think A without B, then B isn't what you were thinking about. So it's like your thought can't accidentally reach the wrong thing. It's um, what you were thinking about is A as such and not. So, like, so to speak, you were thinking A could be without B by thinking of only A and not thinking of B. So you think A could be without B. Um, um, so admit it, A can be without B. That's what you think, right? I mean, uh, now, I mean, so why does the meditator not come out and say that? Well, I think, because in Descartes' mind at least, but maybe not in Spinoza or Leibniz's mind, but in Descartes' mind at least, this still relies on God not being a deceiver. Um, like, um, um, I think A could be without. I think A could exist without B, but I might be wrong if I'm being deceived. Um, um, But in the end, it's gonna turn out, no, I couldn't be wrong about something like that. So Descartes gonna, in the end, agree with this strategy. Um, so therefore what we get, and this is what, Descartes in that short passage from the objections and replies. So I guess I should say what the objections and replies are. Right, before Descartes published the Meditations, he sent them around to various people to get their objections. And Hobbes was one of the people. The passage that I was reading from the second is from the second objections. The second objections were collected by Mersenne. So Mersenne, famous as the inventor, discoverer, I don't know, of the Mersenne primes. He was a mathematician and a philosopher and whatever, kind of a friend of Descartes, and he collected objections from various philosophers and theologians at the Sorbonne, which is the university in Paris. So that was the second objections. And the others were written by other people. And so he collected all these objections, and then he wrote answers to all of them. And he published the Meditations with the objections and replies. So, and in that objection, whoever this anonymous theologian or philosopher is, the Wikipedia article says that most of them actually were the work of Mersenne himself, but there's no citation. So I'm not sure how we know that. But whoever it was said to him, you should have proceeded more geometrico by the geometrical mode. Meaning you should have copied Euclid's style in Euclid's Elements. That was the paradigm of rigorous reasoning that leads to certainty. So there should have been axioms and definitions and theorems with proofs and all that stuff. That is exactly what we're going to get in Spinoza. And he describes what he's doing is this, more geometrical. But Descartes answers the objection. I mean, actually, if you read on further, he actually does produce, he says, I could do it that way. And he starts doing it, right? He gives axioms and stuff. But he says, but I didn't do it that way because he calls this the synthetic method. The synthetic method is you start with things that the person accepts immediately. And then by steps that they also agree to immediately, you lead them from one thing into another until you force them to accept the conclusion. And Descartes says that's good for geometry because the fundamental concepts of geometry are very clear and evident to everyone, like line and point and whatever. And so, like, you can just say simple things about them and people will accept them and you can go on and that will work. But he says in metaphysics, the hardest part is getting clear and distinct concepts. And I think this passage is supposed to be an example of that. Where he says, so instead, you have to start with kind of a mass of what they already think. And analytic means like, not anal, but analytic, right? Means this, like, luane in Greek means like untying or dissolving. So this just like breaking up. It's like an up. So, right, the analytic method is the method that pairs away rather than building up. and so that's what he's doing here. That's what the meditator says she's gonna do here. She's gonna, start with what she previously believed she was. So that's gonna be a confused, idea that confused means different parts are fused together. Different things that really can be thought separately have been put together. And the analytic method is going to be to separate them to get a distinct conception. And in the end, we're going to be left with just the part that really is certain. The thing that I really was thinking at the end of this argument. But to begin with, I don't know because it's all mixed up with other stuff. Right? So I will therefore go back and meditate on what I originally believed myself to be before I embarked on this present train of thought. I will then subtract anything capable of being weakened, even minimally, by the arguments now introduced. So that and so anything that could be weakened by the arguments now introduced is not something that I proved I was certain about. So it wasn't what I was thinking at the end of the argument. So I get rid of everything like that. And what's left is exactly and only what is certain and unshakable. Um, I mean, later people are gonna ask about this method. That wait, isn't it the case that no two things that if you're thinking A and B and you're not thinking the same thing twice, then you can always think one without the other. And Hume is going to ask that, and Kant is going to ask that, or rather, it's going to assert that basically that there's no necessary connection between distinct ideas, so that you never will find a case where you can't think A without B. But the rationalists think there are cases like that, and it's possible, and I guess I would say this is what Hegel says about it, that that rather than bring that logical argument to bear and say this method can't work because if A and B are not exactly the same thought, one can always be thought without the other. You turn around and say, no, your logic must be wrong. Right? We need a new kind of logic that explains how it can be that there are two different things that nevertheless one can't be thought without the other. Okay, but anyway, so going back to Descartes. So right, so the idea is to like get rid of everything that I wasn't thinking when I thought of myself, and then I'll be left with what I actually am. And as I said, this is actually more parallel to Avicenna's floating man argument. That right, Avicenna tries to prove that the soul is distinct from the body by this example of, so it's called a floating man because it's a man or human being, I guess. I don't think he uses the word in Arabic that means man as opposed to woman. But anyway, it's a person who is floating in the air, and the air is like neither hot nor cold, and it's dark and it's silent, and they're not touching themselves. And Avicenna says in that situation, they wouldn't know they had a body. Now that's maybe somewhat questionable, but anyway, that's what he says. In that situation, I mean, I guess sensory deprivation, people do, I guess, kind of describe themselves as feeling disembodied. I don't know. But anyway, so in that situation, they wouldn't know if they had a body, but they would still know that they had a mind. And therefore, the mind is not the same as the body. So it is pretty much, I mean, it doesn't start from radical doubts, and it doesn't reach the same kind of conclusion that Descartes is going to reach, especially in the sixth meditation, that minds and bodies are two different kinds of substances, either of which can exist without the other. But it is, you know, a version, an argument like this, and something that Descartes might have known about. Um, I mean, in Descartes' hands, it rules out a lot of things that Avicenna would have said were faculties of the soul, like nutrition, and in a certain sense, sensation. We're going to talk about that. Right, that is, it goes farther than Avicenna. It shows that it's the rational soul or the intellect, right? And that's what the meditator is going to say in the end. A mind or intelligence or intellect or reason. That's what I proved that I am. Okay, so what's Descartes' answer to this? I mean, we've kind of already given it away, you know, but I mean, so the meditator tries out really three answers. The first answer is, what did I used to think I was? A rational animal. We recognize that as a traditional Aristotelian definition, right? The second one was a body. Now, I mean, this is not something that a traditional Aristotelian would say, or most of them wouldn't anyway. I mean, Galen would, and he's important, but most of them wouldn't. Because most Aristotelians think that the intellectual soul doesn't have an organ, doesn't have a material organ. So it's incorporeal. And then the third answer, which is the right one, is a thinking thing. Res cogitans. This is the genus and this is the differentiator. Right, so we went from this genus differentia definition, rational animal, to this one, thinking thing. So the first one is rejected. First one is rejected. Well, I'll just read it. It's so short. Shall I say a rational animal? No, for then I should have to inquire what an animal is, what rationality is. And in this way, one question would lead me down the slope to other harder ones. And I do not now have the time to waste on subtleties of this kind. Yeah, I mean, what she actually says is, I do not have sufficient free time. Right. in Latin means, it's the opposite of business, which is negotium, right? Otium is when you don't have any business and you don't have to do anything. That's what the meditator said she made sure to procure for herself in advance before she started these meditations, right? That was, um, um, so today I have expressly rid my mind of all worries and arranged for myself a clear stretch of free time. That again is the same word. All right. So she's saying, yes, I've arranged a stretch of free time, but not enough to go into all these subtleties about what is animal and what is rational. And like, how seriously can we take that excuse? I mean, maybe you could take it seriously. Um, I mean, after all, like we do have this problem about the temporal gap. Like, in a sense, this whole argument should be carried out immediately. Before we go on to the next thought. um, uh, or at least we should be able to put it back into that first thought, as I was putting it before, like reinterpret, see it in the first thought. So when we have that first thought, namely, I think, therefore I am, again, we'll see that what it means, that a thinking thing exists. And if there had to be a whole like thing about rationality and animality and whatever, then that would be no good. So, I mean, maybe it can be taken seriously, but I think it also, well, I mean, it would be a bad starting point from Descartes' point of view, because Descartes is going to essentially conclude there is no such thing as this. So the method of analysis would be hard to apply. That is, Descartes is going to essentially conclude that the animal is a body, and what's rational is not a body, and the relationship to each other is not, right, like an Aristotelian. So even if they think that the rational soul is itself not corporeal, they also think it's the form of this body. That is, it's what makes this body actually the type of thing it is. Take it away, and this body wouldn't even be a single thing anymore. Right? It would be like dead Bucephalus. Take away the form of horse, and you're just left with a bunch of matter. Similarly, if you take away this intellectual soul, even though it itself is not corporeal, this body is no longer a human body. It might still look like one, just like the hand of a statue still looks like a hand. Looks like, I guess, not still, it looks like a hand, but it's not really a human body anymore. Whereas Descartes, the conclusion Descartes is heading for, and again, you can't prove this till the sixth meditation, but the conclusion Descartes is heading for is this body is its own thing. And this is something else. And they have some interaction with each other, which is going to be hard for him to explain, but they have some interaction with each other, but either one could exist without the other. So, and in particular, he's going to say that other animals that are not rational are just this. And why do they do all these complicated things? Well, because they have a very complicated mechanism inside. Gears or something, right? Very small. And this body is no different. It also could do most of the things it does if the rational soul were gone. Okay, So, yeah, that's one reason to reject this, but furthermore, I mean, uh, he would have to introduce all kinds of other stuff, extrinsic stuff, in order to try and explain what these terms are supposed to mean, and this is not the time for that. I mean, in a way, all three of these reasons go together, I guess, but anyway, so, right, so this one is rejected. This is not a suitable starting point. So instead, the meditator says, I'm gonna concentrate on what came into my thoughts spontaneously and guided by nature, or quite naturally is how they define it, how they translate it, whenever I used to consider what I was. So, right, as opposed to this thing which I learned in school, I'm gonna look back and see what did I think I was when when I was just um, considering myself naturally. This is like an artificial definition. So the natural one. And then um the natural one, as I said, is basically that I was a body. Right? I mean, there's two parts to it. The first part is that I have a face, hands, arms, and the whole mechanical structure. It actually says the whole machine. They tried to, I don't know why they decided to make it sound better by saying mechanical structure. The whole machine of limbs, which can be seen in a corpse, and which I called the body. That was number one. The next thought is that I was nourished and moved about and engaged in sense perception and thinking. And these actions I attributed to the soul. But what did I think the soul was? And so she says, well, either I didn't really think about it at all, or I imagined it also to be a body, something tenuous like a wind or fire or ether, which permeated my more solid parts. Now, I mean, this is something that some ancient philosophers believed, not Aristotelians, right? That the soul is, like the Stoics believe something like this, that the soul is a very tenuous fluid that moves around through the body. So it's itself is corporeal. It's just a thin body, right? Aristotelians think there is something like, but they don't think that's the soul, right? So they think the soul is, well, I mean, it's in the whole body, but somehow some of its faculties are, Aristotle would say in the heart, but most later Aristotelians would say in the brain. Um, so, um, um, and but the brain is connected to the rest of the body by nerves, and this thin fluid flows through the nerves and makes the body do what it does, and that is called spirit or animal spirits. And Descartes also believes that. Descartes also thinks that in the body there's this very tenuous fluid that moves around in the brain and that moves through the nerves, and by moving through the nerves, it helps the brain control the rest of the body. And I mean, in a way, it's kind of true, right? I mean, it's just like it's ions or something. But anyway, um, uh, so, but Descartes is saying that this was the natural way I thought of myself. I mean, maybe that's pressing a little natural, a little bit too far. Or maybe he just means like like something much simpler than this, right? Like, I mean, the fact that in many languages, the word that means soul, like originally means wind or something, or breath or something. That, yeah, like the people think that the life of the thing is its breath. Well, so in any case, um, I have time to. Yeah, I think I'll talk about this more next time. I mean, because so Descartes does start inserting his own thoughts about what a body is. but at this stage, it's like it's partly things he agrees with and partly things he disagrees with. Um, a body is something that um, um, has a determinable shape and a definable location. This is a very bad translation, but I won't go into it. And can occupy a space in such a way as to exclude any other body. And it can be perceived by touch, sight, hearing, taste, or smell, and can be moved in various ways. So Descartes is going to agree with everything except the part about being perceived by touch, sight, hearing, taste, or smell. um, Descartes thinks that bodies don't have sensible properties. But we'll get to that in the reading for next time. But so anyway, uh, whatever a body is, what we know about it is, and this is the analytic method coming in, what we know about a body is that we're able to call their existence into question. We were able to call the existence of particular bodies into question by casting doubt on the reliability of our senses. But more than that, we were able to call into doubt the quote unquote existence of things like extension, figure, or motion by calling into doubt the evidence of our reason. So, meaning something like, you know, these things might be impossible fictions. Not so that is, it might not just be that maybe it's more than that there might not be any bodies. There might not be any such thought as body, so to speak. Um, um, so I was able to persuade myself of that, right? At least as a fiction, that there are no bodies, that there is no such thing as body. And yet I was certain that I exist, right? So therefore I can definitely think of myself without thinking of bodies. And so I'm not a body. Um, well, what is there that I couldn't think of myself as existing without? Um, and so the answer is thinking. But it's going to be important to figure out what that means. I mean, because at first the meditator just says, I am, I exist, that is certain. But for how long? For as long as I am thinking. For it could be that were I totally to cease from thinking, I should totally cease to exist. Um, so, but why? Like, how do we know? I mean, that's just at that point, it's just baldly asserted. So I think the answer is comes on page 83. This is after like the imagination is rejected as a way of finding out anything about this. And then we go back, right? The imagination is the faculty of, so to speak, sensing things even though they aren't there. This is Aristotle's definition of imagination. And this is what these people mean by imagination, right? So imagination is involved in dreaming. Imagination is also involved in mental imagery, in doing mathematics or geometry. Um, so, but Descartes is saying imagination is like the senses. We can't rely on it here. So, and then on page 83, but what then am I? A thing that thinks. What is that? A thing that doubts, understands, affirms, denies, is willing, is unwilling, and also imagines and has sensory perceptions. This is a considerable list if everything on it belongs to me, but does it? Is it not one and the same I who is now doubting almost everything? I think it should say, but doesn't it? But all right, whatever. Is it not one and the same I who is now doubting almost everything, who nonetheless understands some things, who affirms that this one thing is true, et cetera, et cetera? In other words, the answer to this question is, what did I prove exists? Well, something that can go through this proof. That's all I know. Right, so this whole list of faculties is just the faculties that I'm using right now to understand the proof. Doubting, affirming, denying, willing, right? And the example of willing is um, desires to know more, is unwilling to be deceived, right? That's the faculty of will that I had to use to go through this proof. I had to will to know more, and I had to desire not to be deceived. So I've proved, what I've proved I mean, what else do I have to work with? I don't have anything else to work with except the proof. So the only thing I could have proved to exist is the thing that carried out the proof. And what I know about it is it can carry out this proof. And that's where this whole list comes from. I could say more, but I mean, I'll just say it's exactly this move where Kant thinks that Descartes makes a mistake. I think Kant thinks the cogito argument is right up until this point, but that after this it goes off. But I mean, you have to be pretty subtle to see how that could be, because it does seem convincing, right? Like I proved that a doubting thing exists, basically, to summarize it. Okay, I will see you next time, and I'll figure out what to do about the missing metaphysics exercise. Sorry about that. Good night.